Okay, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and this is a really interesting topic for me because who knows about vertical farming? Anybody have an idea what it is? Well, typically vertical farming isn't used to grow wheat, so I have the challenge today to try and explain the future and potential for vertical farming in wheat. So I'll begin by just introducing what vertical farming is, trying to boost your knowledge, and then talk about some of the potential applications in the future to the wheat industry. So first of all, what is vertical farming? Vertical farming is really about growing food indoors in controlled environments. So what you do is you essentially create a structure. You create kind of a building, or it could be a greenhouse in some cases. Typically it's a warehouse, and you stack cultivation systems indoors. So you have the shell, which is the exterior structure. You typically have hydroponic systems. These are systems that use water as the main driver for nutrients, not soil. You have a medium, essentially a substrate, something that mimics the soil. Why do you do that? Because soil has contaminants in it, and the substrate lets you control the level of nutrients and oxygen that the plants receive. So you can see here the roots are submerged in the water, or they're affected by a mist, and the substrate provides the structure for that. So how do you light it, right? You're stacking systems, so you need to replace the sun. What we use is LEDs. So these are advanced lighting systems that you can control the spectrum. So outdoors, plants get a full spectrum of light, but indoors, we actually control the direct spectrum they need. What that allows us to do is we can actually grow plants faster, sometimes 30%, 40% faster. We can actually stimulate more vitamin C in the plant. We can stimulate different kinds of growth. And we can do all of that without genetically modifying the plant. So these LEDs are quite powerful. This technology is also very thin and low in heat, so it allows us to stack them and create these microclimates where previous lighting conditions didn't allow it. We have to control the heating and ventilation, so every single level has its own microclimate. So we have to create different temperatures there, ventilation across the canopy, make sure the plant is photosynthesizing, and then we need a structure to support the whole thing. In addition to this, it's a farm, so we need storage, processing, distribution. So vertical farms are very heavy on equipment, and they have a lot of potential to control the environment. So every single harvest, no matter what the year is, no matter what the weather is outside, is consistent. So that's a big value proposition for certain buyers if they're concerned about food safety, if they're concerned about climate change or fluctuation between winter and summer. So as you can see, it's very equipment intensive and capital intensive. So what might justify us to go indoors? Why would we do it, right? What are the drivers that would make that happen? So it's hard to see here, but on the left side I've got different drivers. Water scarcity would be one. When you go indoors, you control the water and recirculate it. So that allows you to be more efficient, 70 to 90% less water use. Food safety, because you have no animals in the farm, you have much more food safe product. That'll drive farming indoors. Limited arable land, so in the Middle East, for example, or in certain parts of Australia, certain parts of the world, there's limited arable land. So when you don't have arable land, you need to kind of go indoors. So that's driving the industry forward. Unfavorable weather, I mentioned. The demand for local. Consumers want more local food. We see it kind of start to compete with organic. That's driving people to build farms closer to the city. Vertical farming allows that. And also, I think there's two more: innovation, leadership, and food security. So certain markets want to be leaders in agriculture. They're going to invest in vertical farming to make sure that they're exporting that technology. And certain markets, again, going to the Middle East, have food security challenges. They import 90% of their food, or island states, for example, import a lot of their food. So they can grow more locally. That's why they would do it. But as we saw from the previous picture, most of it's leafy greens, right? So we're growing typically herbs, leafy greens, microgreens, some cherry tomatoes, not wheat. But before I go into how it applies to wheat, I want to talk about some of the myths. People think vertical farming means skyscrapers, big towers. But because it's agriculture, it doesn't really compete on a dollars per square foot level with commercial residential real estate. So what you're typically going to see is warehouses on the outskirts of cities be converted. You can imagine old mini malls or underused basement spaces or warehouses next to distribution centers. These are the future vertical farms. People say that vertical farming might compete with outdoor growing. I don't think that's true. I think that it'll start to supplement the system with a new crop that's targeted at a premium customer. And over time, as climate change gets worse, in the categories of leafy greens, it'll probably start to take more of that market away. But it's not going to replace agriculture overall. It's simply too expensive per square foot to replace the scale of outdoor agriculture. vertical farming is not going to solve all of our agricultural problems. It'll solve specific ones. And vertical farming is a reality today. So there's now hundreds of them around the world, when about 7 years ago there were no commercial vertical farms in North America. So let's talk about wheat production in controlled environments. So again, vertical farming is under the category of controlled environment agriculture, controlling light, controlling climate, controlling the nutrients. So although there's not any commercial examples of wheat being grown in vertical farms, there's actually quite a few research studies that have been done since the 1970s and 80s. Why were they looking at this? Really for space exploration. Imagine you're going to Mars and you have to bring all the food for you and all the astronauts when you arrive there. That's simply not sustainable. So NASA and other research institutions started exploring how you could grow all the food you needed. And they started actually creating these recirculating systems that would grow the oxygen, the food, and the water that you would need to make it to space. So literally greenhouses on space stations. So while that research has been quite extensive across the world, it hasn't really had any commercial applications yet. So again, they were trying to create recirculating bioregenerative systems, and there's been a lot of research, but almost none of it has been applied commercially yet. Some of the research has been about growing dwarf varieties of wheat, so smaller varieties that have more production at the head of the plant. Because again, if you're stacking systems, or if you have limited space, like in a space station, wheat is quite large and quite difficult to cultivate. So here are some other potential applications that I want to talk about. Let me just pull up my notes here. So I think one of the ones that's really interesting is that climate change is actually threatening all kinds of agriculture. And as the temperature goes up, we actually see that the quality of the wheat plants goes down. So for every additional degree Celsius, I read that wheat yield decreases 5 to 7%. So we're seeing that wheat yields have already decreased by almost 1% and barley almost by 8% in the face of climate change. So you can imagine over the next 10 to 20 years, as that gets worse, it might start to drive new innovation for indoor growing. We might need to respond to that by creating protected environments. Maybe they won't be big vertical farms that are stacked, but I hypothesize that there'll be a new kind of integration for these more staple crops that will be a variation of controlled environment agriculture that will apply to these industries. And it won't, these crops rather, and it won't necessarily be everywhere in the world. Obviously the climate is changing in different ways, but there'll be certain markets where it makes sense. So that's, I'd say, prediction number one for the applications. There's also other applications around unique flavors. So because you're going indoors, without genetically modifying the plant, you can actually control the flavor of the product in different ways. And so one of the things that I was reading about was a bit of consolidation in the industry. And so as the industry is being consolidated, there's less small farmers, we tend to lose some of the flavor and the quality. So there may be a case for artisan kind of wheat farms that are growing indoors or controlling the flavor in different ways. And so again, I think there's different levels of quality and nutrition profiles that may drive the industry forward. But I think for the next 10 years, it's really mostly going to be research focused. How do we respond to climate change? How do we create new flavors? I think the commercialization of that is still at least a decade away. And even when it does commercialize, I think because of the scale and demand of wheat and the price of it, it's not going to be that competitive. So I actually did a bit of a calculation when we were thinking about growing wheat in a vertical farm. And so my team and I looked at this, and one of the things that we calculated was if I was to grow wheat in a vertical farm, how much would the bread made from that wheat cost? Any guesses? How much is a loaf of bread today? What, like $1.50? $2? You're the baking experts. $6 for a loaf? Maybe. Okay. So this vertical farm loaf would be about $11 to $23 in our calculation. Would you pay that? Is there ever a circumstance if it had a particular flavor, or if the wheat was grown in New Jersey and you were buying it in New York? So that cost has to go down a lot. And look, the cost of vertical farm products, even leafy greens, are more expensive now. They're typically 10 to 20% more expensive. And that cost is going down dramatically because LEDs are advancing very rapidly. They're essentially microchips. They advance the same way that Moore's law advances. And so we're going to see those costs go down, but not unless there starts to be more commercial applications for vertical farming will we see the cost of that loaf of bread go down. Okay, I want to talk a little about harvest index. Who knows about edible biomass and harvest index? Okay, so every plant has a harvest index or edible biomass, a percentage of the plant after you harvest it that's consumable. Okay, so what do you think the edible biomass is for wheat? Pretty small, right? So about 30% of the plant is what you actually use to produce the final product. What about lettuce? What do you think the edible biomass is of lettuce? Higher, right? But 98%. So you can imagine when you're justifying all this equipment to grow food indoors, it's going to make more sense when the edible biomass is higher, because I'm replacing the sun and I'm paying for every single photon, all the electricity that goes onto the plant. So the higher the edible biomass, the more my investment is going to make sense. That's another reason why wheat is not typically grown indoors. Another one is that it ships well. So if I'm shipping lettuce from California to New York, I'm going to lose some quality. But if I'm shipping wheat, I may not lose as much quality. It'll store pretty well. And the technology for storing it is pretty established. So it's really always just about, a balance between the investment and the ROI. And I think because of the scale of the wheat industry, there will be innovation and research, but it's not quite commercialized anytime soon. So these are kind of the advancements that would be needed in the future. Lighting, as I said, is advancing really rapidly. There's something called Heitz's law, which is the same as Moore's law for microchips, but it's applied to LEDs. And Heitz's law essentially states that every year, as LEDs get more efficient, actually they double in efficiency, they cut half in cost. So that's why the industry has grown so rapidly in vertical farming so quickly. And we're going to see the similar thing affect that. HVAC, controlling the temperature. So what we found is that as we're controlling these microclimates, it's very difficult, right? Every single plant sweats and it evapotranspirates. So that creates a new microclimate. And to control that requires a sophisticated plan around HVAC. We're kind of figuring it out for leafy greens. When you bring in a new product like wheat, that's going to be a whole other set of innovation that's needed. And then automation. Because wheat is pretty labor intensive in a lot of ways to harvest, we're going to need to apply the automation equipment that you see in the field to indoor growing to reduce those labor costs. Because labor costs in vertical farms are still going to be about 40% of the cost of the operation. So we really need to cut those down for any viable future to get the cost of this loaf of bread down from $23 or $11. So I think it's going to be about the technology. I think we're going to start to see science really advance, and it's going to be about the market, right? Are people going to demand it? Is anybody going to ask for that product because it uses less water, or because the nutrition value is higher, because climate change is threatening the nutrition in wheat? These are going to be the drivers that are going to make wheat production possible in the future in vertical farms. I want to talk a little bit about vertical farming today and how it could apply. So, retail is changing. Consumers, especially millennials like myself, we want experiences. We don't want the typical shopping experience. We want to have an Instagram moment. We want to connect with the brand in a different way. And vertical farms can have a pretty big wow factor. You can look it up if you Google vertical farming or look at our blog Agritecture, but some of them are very inspiring with the lights and the plants. When you go into a store and you see that may really wow you. So I think that there are certain retail outlets in the baking industry that could really benefit from growing some of their plants in their stores to add a competitive nature to their competitors by having this experience in their house, in their retail spaces. I think also that there's potential for growing some of the flavors that you add to the product. So rosemary you can grow in a vertical farm today, no problem. So you can actually grow the rosemary that you need, and you can grow that at a consistent price year round. And you can market the fact that our rosemary is grown using 70% less water and much less food miles. That may be convincing to a customer, and the flavor of that product could also be controlled and better. So you may have a competitive edge that way. Finally, on co-location, you can imagine that the production sites for bread could actually have larger scale vertical farms, not just small retail ones, but larger ones that are growing that rosemary for even large scale producers of bread. That's possible. And so again, this is a little bit on the consolidation. I think as consolidation happens in the agriculture industry, we see a pushback from consumers to want more unique varieties, unique products. That could possibly happen in wheat in the next 10 years. We start to see small-scale farms that are growing kind of specialty, kind of what you saw with the heirloom tomato movement. You could see something similar happen in this, possibly. And so again, I think you could connect it to the mill and the bakery. I already talked about this. This is an example of a vertical farm, though. This is a small-scale, high-end vertical farm. It's about 1,200 square feet. And guess where it is? It's the basement of a building in Tribeca, Manhattan. So in Manhattan, what they did was they found a completely unused space. They negotiated with the restaurant that the restaurant gets a little bit of the product, and they're able to grow 500 different varieties of rare herbs, culinary plants for Michelin-star restaurants in Manhattan. And they deliver every single one by subway or by bike under 30 minutes. So this is the future of vertical farming on the high-end market, and you can imagine in the future that this might even happen for wheat. I actually got an unusual request from a lead preparing for this talk. They were doing a specialty alcohol, and they wanted to create an experience around barley, and they wanted to grow it indoors. They wanted to design an indoor farm where you would be in Manhattan, and you'd actually be in the field and learn about the sourcing of the product. So these are the kind of ideas that might happen, and you can only do this because you can grow indoors with these new lights and these new HVAC control systems. Other ones could be for experimentation. I think you're going to see a lot of seed companies already involved in this. There's going to be a lot of research going into wheat production. Seed banks could happen, and the secondary ingredients like rosemary that I mentioned already. And so again, there's this kind of artisanal experience that could happen with it in the future. So in conclusion, I think vertical farming is really about an efficient use of space, and it gives you ultimate control. That control will only be justified if the ROI is there. If someone's going to pay more for the product, and if that output is going to convince the consumer and their heart and their wallet to really be invested in that. But there could be other drivers like the changing climate that could make and accelerate that need faster as nutrition value in wheat and barley goes down much faster. And I think that there's going to be a lot of research, as I said. I think overall, we're not going to see any commercialized wheat production in the next decade, but maybe a decade from now, as climate change gets much worse, we may start to see more production of wheat indoors. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.